The rain had begun to fall in a slow, steady drizzle by the time Frank Skip Miller reached the outskirts of Ashwood. His worn-out bicycle, hand-painted in fading shades of red and blue, creaked with each rotation of the pedals. The wheels, long stripped of any shine, splashed weakly through puddles forming in the broken asphalt. Skip hunched over the handlebars, his back aching with each mile, but he pressed forward, determined not to miss his monthly checkup at the Veterans Hospital. It was one of the few appointments he never missed, a quiet promise to himself to keep going, to keep proving he was still strong enough to take care of what little remained. The cold had crept deep into his joints, riding up the sleeves of his patched military jacket. His hands, stiff from the lingering effects of the stroke, gripped the handlebars tightly, each bump in the road sending a fresh reminder of his body's betrayals. His breath came out in short white bursts, disappearing almost immediately into the damp grayness of the Montana morning. Just ahead, the weathered sign of the Red Rooster Diner loomed through the mist, its peeling paint flapping weakly in the growing wind. A place once bustling with truckers and town folk now leaned slightly, as though weary from standing guard over so many years. From under its rusted awning spilled the murky light of a few neon signs advertising coffee, pie, and warmth, none of which felt particularly welcoming as Skip coasted closer. Then, a sudden metallic snap echoed through the quiet drizzle. Skip's heart dropped. He knew the sound all too well. The bicycle chain had snapped clean through. The bike jolted, and Skip quickly jammed his good foot to the ground to steady himself before he toppled over. He came to a stop just short of the diner's cracked parking lot. For a moment, he sat there, listening to the rain ping off his helmet, hoping maybe the chain had only slipped free. But hope had rarely favored him these last few years. With a weary sigh, he swung his stiff leg over the frame and carefully knelt by the wounded bicycle, his knees protesting the movement with sharp pains. Skip fumbled with the chain, his numb fingers slipping on the greasy links. His hands, once strong enough to pull wounded comrades from burning vehicles, now shook from simple exertion. The rain made the task harder, turning grime into slick black mud. Still, he persisted, his mind narrowing to the simple task of threading the chain back onto the sprockets. From the shelter of the diner, a different noise cut through the rain, laughter. High, sharp, and close. Skip didn't look up. Years of experience had taught him that attention only fed cruelty. His shoulders hunched further against the cold and against the feeling creeping up his spine, a feeling more chilling than the weather, the sense of being watched not with concern, but with amusement. A group of young men stood near the diner's entrance, their black leather jackets shining from the wet. Their bikes, gleaming chrome monsters, were lined up in the parking lot like mechanical beasts. The men were drinking coffee from paper cups, their hands warm, their faces flushed with a mixture of bravado and boredom. They had the easy arrogance of youth untouched by hardship. One of them nudged another with his elbow and jerked his chin toward Skip. More laughter followed, louder this time. Another made an exaggerated imitation of pedaling a bicycle, his friends howling as he stumbled around in mock struggle. A few clapped and hooted, the sound carrying easily across the damp air. Skip tightened his jaw, focusing harder on the task in front of him. The chain was twisted beyond his ability to fix it easily. He wiped his hand across his jacket instinctively, smearing grease across fabric already stained by years of labor and wear. In the corner of his mind, a hollow ache began to open, the familiar, gnawing feeling of being small and out of place. Footsteps approached, crunching over the gravel with deliberate slowness. A shadow fell across Skip's work. "Hey, Pops," came a voice thick with mockery, "you lose your training wheels?" Skip didn't respond. He tugged at the chain again, his fingers trembling not just from the cold now. Another voice, younger, meaner, "Maybe he's late for bingo night." Boots scuffed against the gravel, a leather boot appearing near Skip's hands. Before he could react, the boot kicked forward, striking the front wheel of the bicycle. The old metal frame shuddered violently, the front wheel bending with a horrible screech. Skip instinctively grabbed for the bike to steady it, but it was too late. The delicate balance of the worn-out machine had been destroyed. As he struggled to right it, a sudden gust of wind barreled through the parking lot, catching the bike like a sail. In a terrible instant, the bicycle toppled sideways, rolling out into the street just as a massive transport truck rumbled by. The crash was merciless. The bike crumpled under the weight of the truck's tires, flattened like paper against the asphalt. A spray of mud and metal shards burst into the air. Skip stood frozen, his hands still half extended, watching the only thing that had given him independence since the stroke reduced to twisted ruin. The laughter from the young men exploded into full-bodied howls. Skip stood there in the rain, water running down his face, soaking his jeans, chilling his bones. His hands hung useless at his sides. Inside, a knot tightened, not of rage, but of something heavier, the sharp, bitter taste of humiliation. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of the rain, the distant hum of the truck disappearing down the highway, and the cruel echo of laughter bouncing off the wet concrete walls of the diner. He took a slow breath, the cold air burning in his chest. Without a word, he bent down, gathered the few salvaged pieces of the bicycle, a bent pedal, a scrap of chain, and walked them carefully to the edge of the lot. He laid them gently against the curb, like one might lay down a flag folded in mourning. Inside the diner, the young men returned to their coffee, their amusement already waning as newer distractions beckoned. Skip straightened, his back stiff with pain, his heart heavier than the sodden air around him. He turned his face toward the gray sky, letting the rain wash the grease and dirt from his hands. No one came to help. No one apologized. He didn't expect them to. In his mind, he repeated a quiet mantra he had learned decades ago, standing guard in muddy trenches far from home: endure. Adapt. Overcome. But in the small, cold silence that now wrapped itself around him like a second skin, Skip wondered how much longer he could keep enduring alone. The rain thickened, falling in heavy beads that struck the cracked pavement with small, sharp sounds. Skip stood motionless for a moment longer, hands loose at his sides, the cold seeping deeper into his bones. Around him, the world felt hollow, the diner's neon signs buzzing weakly, the wind stirring scraps of old newspapers across the lot, the distant growl of trucks on the wet highway. Behind him, the door to the diner swung open with a hollow clang, spilling music and the acrid smell of stale coffee into the damp air. The young men had decided the show wasn't quite over. They swaggered out in small groups, each carrying the easy arrogance of those who had never known real fear, real hunger, or real loss. Skip didn't turn to face them. His pride, battered though it was, would not allow it. He simply tightened his grip around the strap of his small canvas bag, the one he carried everywhere, filled with small tools, a faded photograph of his old unit, and a battered thermos that still bore his name from boot camp. Footsteps shuffled behind him, drawing closer, boots scraping purposefully on the pavement. One of the young men, a tall figure with a smirk etched permanently onto his face, stepped around to block Skip's path. His leather jacket was pristine, creaking softly as he crossed his arms. "You know," the young man said, voice oily with false sympathy, "if you're gonna ride that junk heap, maybe stick to the sidewalks next time, Grandpa." Another round of laughter erupted from the others. They leaned against the diner's railings, shielding themselves from the rain with upturned collars, their jeers sharper now, more confident after the public spectacle. Skip kept his eyes low, his breath steady, but he couldn't stop the small tremor in his jaw. It wasn't anger that filled him, not the kind that demands shouting or fists. It was something sadder, something more resigned, the quiet grief of dignity chipped away one cruel word at a time. A second man, stockier, with a sharp gleam in his eye, circled around Skip like a predator sensing weakness. He pointed at the mangled bicycle lying broken by the curb and barked a laugh. "Guess the old geezer finally got retired for good," he said. "Maybe we should start a GoFundMe. Get you a rocking chair or something." Skip shifted his weight, feeling the slow grind of old injuries in his knees. His fingers itched to tighten into fists, to swing back with all the force of the man he once was. But another part of him, the wiser part, the part that had survived deserts and jungles and dark hospital rooms, knew it would serve no purpose here. These boys didn't know what battles really looked like. They thought war was a game played on television screens, not something carried home in the bodies and souls of men like him. From the shelter of the diner's entrance, other patrons watched. Some through the smeared windows, pretending not to see. Some lowering their eyes to their plates, stirring coffee with mechanical indifference. No one moved to intervene. No one spoke up. The world had learned to look past men like Skip, to see only the worn shoes, the stooped shoulders, the smell of grease and rain and faded memories. Heroes in uniform were easy to salute on parade days. Broken men on bicycles were easier to forget. Another shove from behind jolted him slightly forward. Not hard enough to knock him down, just enough to humiliate. Skip caught himself and stayed upright, his boots slipping slightly in the wet gravel. The leader of the group stepped closer until the rain beaded on the leather of his jacket and dripped onto Skip's battered canvas bag. His voice dropped, low and mocking. "Maybe you ought to just stay home next time, old man," he said. "Nobody needs to see this kind of thing while they're eating. You're bad for business." He punctuated the statement with a sharp slap against Skip's shoulder, a gesture dressed up as rough camaraderie but meant to degrade. The force nearly spun Skip sideways. Something inside him flickered then, not anger, but an old, buried pain. The kind of ache that whispered, "You don't belong here anymore. You're just an artifact." A cracked photograph forgotten in a drawer. Skip straightened, as best he could. His body protested, every joint aching in rebellion, but he straightened anyway. His gaze, steady and clear despite the years and the cold and the shame, met the young man's for one brief, crackling second. And for a heartbeat, something shifted in the air. The rain seemed to hesitate. The laughter faltered, just slightly, under the weight of that silent stare, a stare that had seen places these boys could not even pronounce, had borne losses they could not comprehend. But then it passed, as quickly as it came. The young men barked more laughter, uncomfortable now, and turned away, clapping each other on the backs, revving their motorcycles as if the noise itself could drown out what they had almost, for a moment, understood. Skip let them go. He turned slowly back toward the curb where the wreckage of his bicycle lay, kneeling stiffly once more beside it. His fingers brushed the twisted metal frame with the gentleness one might reserve for a wounded comrade. A part of him whispered to leave it, to walk away, to accept defeat. But another part, the stubborn core that no stroke, no cold rain, no cruelty could erode, made him gather the pieces carefully, tucking the bent parts into his canvas bag, feeling the familiar weight press against his side. He stood again, slower this time, the rain pounding harder against the world around him. In his mind, a memory rose, the image of a younger Skip in the jungles of Laos, lifting a wounded man onto his shoulders, bullets snapping through the trees, heart hammering with fear but legs moving forward because stopping was not an option. He had not stopped then. He would not stop now. Without looking back at the diner, at the faces pressed against fogged-up windows, Skip began the long walk toward town. His boots splashed in shallow puddles, his jacket soaked through, but he walked with a stubborn dignity that the cold and the mockery could not strip away. Each step away from the Red Rooster was a step away from shame and a step closer to the quiet victory of endurance. His head was held high, even as the rain washed away the last warmth from the day, leaving only the clean, raw edge of resolve behind him. Behind the diner's cracked windows, the young men mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring like false thunder. But their laughter sounded thinner now, their bravado stretched taut over the fragile insecurity they could not name. And out on the road, under the gray weeping sky, an old man carried the broken remnants of his independence, one slow step at a time, into the gathering storm. The road stretched ahead like a river of broken glass, slick with rain and scattered debris. Skip's steps were slow, deliberate, his boots squelching in the muddy gravel shoulder. The battered canvas bag at his side grew heavier with each mile, though it carried little more than a handful of mangled bicycle parts and the stubborn weight of pride. Behind him, the neon signs of the Red Rooster faded into the mist, swallowed by the gray world that seemed to close in tighter with every breath. The wind whipped harder now, pushing against him as though determined to drive him back toward the humiliation he refused to relive. Each step became a quiet defiance. The ache in his joints spread upward, clawing into his spine. His stroke-affected hand throbbed with cold, the numbness creeping further into his fingers. Skip adjusted the strap of the bag with difficulty, gritting his teeth. The town of Ashwood was still miles away, and he doubted anyone passing by would offer a ride to a soaked, limping old man with a bag full of junk. But Skip had never expected easy paths. Not in Laos, not in the decades after, and certainly not now. For a time, the only sounds were the slap of rain against his jacket, the rasp of his own breathing, and the distant rumble of trucks carving through the storm. Then, faintly at first, he heard something else. A low, throaty roar, growing louder, more insistent. Not the mechanical shriek of 18-wheelers, but a deeper, rolling thunder that seemed to resonate through the very ground beneath his feet. Skip paused at the edge of the road, squinting into the gray curtain of rain, trying to place the sound. Around the distant bend of the highway, headlights pierced the gloom, not the high beams of trucks but the clustered, swinging lights of motorcycles. Dozens of them. The roar swelled until it filled the world, vibrating through the puddles at Skip's feet, rattling the loose teeth of road signs, shivering the skeletal branches of the trees lining the highway. Skip's hand instinctively found the strap of his bag, gripping it tighter as the motorcycles bore down. Part of him braced for more mockery, more disdain. Another part, a quieter voice deep inside, told him to wait. The first of the motorcycles came into view, massive Harleys, their frames gleaming even through the rain, adorned with tattered American flags that whipped violently in the wind. Behind the lead rider, a sea of chrome and leather followed, moving as one, a phalanx of noise and power cutting through the storm like a blade. Skip stayed where he was, standing small and broken at the roadside, his heart thudding in a rhythm that matched the rolling thunder approaching him. The lead bike pulled ahead and then, in a slow, deliberate motion, swung across the road to block both lanes. The rider brought the motorcycle to a growling halt just feet from Skip, planting his boots in the gravel with a certainty that brooked no argument. The roar of the other bike softened as they too slowed, encircling the space around Skip like sentinels. From the lead bike, a figure dismounted, a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a battered leather jacket bearing the unmistakable insignia of a military unit and a patch over one eye that somehow made his steady gaze all the more piercing. The rain sheeted off his shoulders as he approached Skip without hesitation. He stopped before the old veteran and raised his hand in a sharp, precise salute. For a moment, the storm itself seemed to hold its breath. Skip stared, stunned, as the tall man, Luke Bulldog Harris, president of the Spirits of Freedom Motorcycle Club, lowered his salute and extended a hand, calloused and steady. The name was faintly familiar. Bulldog Harris, Afghanistan veteran, multiple tours, decorated for valor. Skip remembered seeing his name on a dusty newspaper years ago, a story about a convoy ambush and a stubborn sergeant who refused to leave his men behind. Recognition sparked between them without a word. Behind Luke, dozens of other bikers dismounted. Their jackets, their patches, their weathered faces all told the same story, men and women who had fought their battles, carried their scars, and chosen brotherhood over bitterness. Flags stitched with unit numbers and campaign ribbons flapped in the rain, banners of sacrifice worn proudly on their backs. Luke didn't speak right away. He simply stood with Skip in the storm, letting the old man see that here, at last, he was seen. One of the bikers, a woman with gray hair tied back in a tight braid, a purple heart pinned to her vest, stepped forward with a heavy canvas tarp. Silently, she draped it over Skip's shoulders, shielding him from the worst of the rain. Another man brought a thick wool blanket, draping it carefully across the worn canvas bag. The kindness, wordless and without condition, hit Skip harder than any insult had. His throat closed, and he struggled to breathe past the emotion rising like a tide inside him. The young men from the diner had spilled out onto the sidewalk now, drawn by the roar of the motorcycles. They watched, slack-jawed, as the Spirits of Freedom formed a protective circle around the old veteran. No one laughed now. No one dared. Luke finally spoke, his voice carrying easily over the hum of the waiting engines. "We take care of our own." Skip tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. He simply nodded, a stiff, trembling motion that carried the full weight of a lifetime. Without another word, Luke gestured toward one of the bikers who had pulled up with a sidecar attached to his Harley. Two younger veterans lifted Skip carefully, their hands steady and respectful, guiding him into the sidecar and securing the tarp around him like a shield against the storm. The convoy rumbled to life again. This time, Skip wasn't walking alone into the rain. He rode at the center of a moving fortress of loyalty and honor, a small island of warmth in a world grown cold. As they pulled away from the diner, the young men who had jeered stood mute and soaked in the rain, their mockery drowned out by the sound of engines and the silent, shattering lesson unfolding before them. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned, and returned, often when it is least expected, and most deserved. The convoy moved through the town like a slow tide of thunder and loyalty. Heads turned in the streets as the long line of motorcycles, flags snapping sharply in the wind, escorted the battered sidecar carrying a soaked but dignified old man. Shopkeepers leaned out of their doorways, children pressed their faces to rain-speckled windows. Few knew exactly what had happened, but instinctively, they understood, something rare, something true was unfolding before their eyes. The spirits of freedom guided Skip not to the hospital, but back to the Red Rooster Diner. It was a deliberate choice. The same young men who had mocked him earlier now stood awkwardly near the entrance, their confidence shriveled into shame. The townsfolk who had watched passively before trickled out too, gathering under dripping awnings, drawn by the rumble and the sudden, undeniable weight of what was happening. Luke Harris dismounted and approached the diner's steps, his boots striking the wet wood with a measured rhythm. Without raising his voice, without issuing threats, he simply stood there, a storm contained in human form, and waited until every pair of eyes was on him. Skip was helped gently from the sidecar, standing shakily under the heavy wool blanket. He faced the diner that had been the stage for his humiliation and the audience that had once turned away from him. Luke turned to face the crowd. "This man," Luke said, his voice carrying over the pattering rain and the idle engines, "is Frank Miller. United States Marine Corps, retired. He saved 6 men in Laos, dragged them out of an ambush when everyone else thought it was too late." He paused, letting the words settle, heavy as stones. "You don't read about men like Skip in textbooks. You don't see them in parades. They don't wear medals to show off. They live among you, quiet, forgotten. Until someone tries to make them smaller." His gaze swept over the crowd, landing briefly on the faces of the young men who had earlier laughed. They looked away, studying the puddles at their feet. "But a man like Skip Miller?" Luke said, his voice rising slightly. "You can't make him smaller. You only show how small you are." The rain slowed to a mist, almost reverent, as silence fell over the crowd. One of the bikers, a grizzled Vietnam veteran, stepped forward holding something in his hand. It was a simple wooden plaque, freshly carved, the letters deep and proud. "Frank Skip Miller, honor in silence, strength in kindness." The biker presented it to Skip without a word. Skip's hands trembled as he accepted it, the weight of recognition almost too much to bear. His vision blurred, not from the rain this time, and he blinked hard to steady himself. Behind him, the spirits of freedom bikers raised their hands in salute, a silent wall of respect stretching from one end of the diner's lot to the other. The moment held, breathless, until finally, one by one, the onlookers began to clap, uncertainly at first, then stronger, a ripple of apology and gratitude passing through the gathered town. Even the young men who had mocked Skip clapped, shame burning their cheeks red. One of them, the one who had kicked his bicycle, stepped forward, head bowed low. Without waiting for permission, he knelt in the wet gravel before Skip and said only 2 words, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry." Skip rested a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder for a moment before helping him rise. It was forgiveness not spoken but given, a simple, quiet mercy that cost nothing but changed everything. In the days that followed, changes rippled outward through Ashwood like circles from a stone thrown into still water. The Red Rooster Diner changed ownership when the ashamed manager quietly stepped down. The new owner, himself a veteran's son, installed the wooden plaque at the entrance, right beneath a freshly painted sign that read, "Heroes always welcome." Skip was made an honorary member of the Spirits of Freedom Club, his name stitched in gold thread onto a weathered black vest they presented to him at a small ceremony. A fellow veteran, a man Skip had once unknowingly helped escort to safety decades earlier, gifted him a fully restored 1955 Schwinn bicycle, shining bright red with white wall tires. A machine as dignified and enduring as Skip himself. Skip's life quietly expanded. At the Spirits of Freedom workshop, he began volunteering, teaching young people from low-income families how to repair old bikes, passing on the same stubborn resilience that had carried him through every battle life had thrown his way. He taught them to value small victories, to find dignity in doing honest work with their hands. Under his guidance, bicycles once headed for the junkyard found new life beneath proud, smiling riders. And so it was that on Veterans Day, just months later, Skip Miller led the town's parade. He rode his gifted Schwinn proudly down Ashwood's main street, the sun catching the polished chrome, his jacket flapping gently in the cool autumn breeze. Behind him rolled a procession of children riding bicycles they had repaired with Skip's help, a living chain of hope and gratitude. Behind them thundered the Spirits of Freedom, their engines rumbling like distant drums of honor, their flags held high. The entire town lined the streets, clapping, waving flags, some wiping away tears. For once, Skip did not feel invisible. He was the heart of Ashwood that day, the quiet proof that kindness, dignity, and courage need no parade to exist, but sometimes, when fate and good people come together, they get one anyway. Kindness without question is enough. And sometimes, it changes everything.